Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Morgan Vogel. I'm a research associate at the Center for Public Affairs Research. Welcome to the 2024 Data and Research Series for Community Impact. We are thrilled to have you here with us today. Our mission at the Center for Public Affairs Research is to produce and disseminate high-quality public scholarship about topics that impact the lives of Nebraskans. We are grounded in our 4 core values of collaboration, purpose, aspiration, and research integrity, which I'm sure you noticed spell out CPAR, so that's convenient for us. Thank you for being here. Those 4 core values have guided our work for 35 years at the Center for Public Affairs Research, and we are proud to be your data partner in the state. We really honestly believe that through the use and application of data, we can learn and grow together. So thanks for being here today. This is our first time offering an in-person option for the research series since 2019. So we're so thrilled to have you back in person. You called for it last year in our evaluation, so here we are. So thanks for being here today. And then we also have a great number of participants online who are with us. They're joining virtually in webinar mode. We're thrilled to have that option to offer greater flexibility for our partners across the state. So I'm here to give you kind of the agenda for the day and share a little bit about our logistics. At CPAR, we have always been and continue to be your go-to source for census data, and that's where we're going to start today. So we will talk a little bit about some of the latest releases of census data. I also wanted to point out that we have a new census request form on our website. So typically, many of you would just email us in the past, and we will fulfill that census data request. But now, with our newly designed website, sorry, Tara, if you could go back for 1 second. This button right here at the bottom, census data requests. If you click on that, it'll take you to the next page. So you can tell us a little bit about your data request, include specific topics of interest to you. This is all based on the census data, and then we will contact you and we can fulfill your request a little bit more easily. Okay, so nearly all of our research projects at CPAR begin with some form or exploration of census data, so that's where we're going to begin today. We'll go over some of the recent releases from the census data, and then Josie Schafer, our director, is going to give you a presentation on demographic, economic shifts, and population trends within the state. After that, we will take a quick 15-minute break, and then we'll be joined via Zoom by Casey Baylitz, the director of the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, to share an update on the 6 Regions, One Nebraska initiative, regional development initiative that began over the summer. And Josie did a lot of work for them traveling across the state with that. And he will also discuss the importance of data for that initiative and achieving their goals within each region. We will conclude the day with a panel of experts here in person to discuss data reliability and how we use data to ensure trustworthiness in decision-making processes, very important. And then our panelists will each kind of give a presentation, talk a little bit about their organization and how they do that, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. For those of you in person, if you have a question at any point during the presentation, just raise your hand and one of our stellar student research assistants, they're in the black UNO shirts. They'll be in each section. They will bring a microphone to you. I know you can be loud, but please use your microphone so that our folks on Zoom can hear you. And then for those of you on Zoom, please submit your questions via the Q&A function. And we are monitoring that in the room. Clay, our research software engineer, is in the back. He's monitoring that and he'll ask those for you. Okay, page 2. Finally, in your registration confirmation email, you received a link to a web page where you can find presentation materials and then a link to the evaluation for today. We really appreciate any feedback that you're willing to share with us so that we can make next year's event even better than this year's. The recording from today will be made available on this web page in about a week, but we will also send you an email so that you're notified when that recording's up and you can check out the presentation materials. Questions about logistics? Okay. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Josie Schafer, Director of the UNO Center for Public Affairs Research, to kick us off with our presentations. Josie joined UNO's College of Public Affairs and Community Service as the director of CPAR in 2018. She manages a stellar team, if I do say so myself, with a current project portfolio totaling over $1 million per year. Her personal project portfolio ranges from numerous research engaged projects, community engaged research projects, where she works collaboratively with community partners, to high-profile research like her work with the Nebraska State Legislature, the Planning Committee. Recent grants and projects led by Josie include, buckle up, there's a lot. Research and analysis as part of the 6 Regions, 1 Nebraska initiative, review of demographic, workforce, and housing trends for Omaha neighborhoods, collaboration with UNMC to analyze the status and future of the healthcare workforce. I heard there was a healthcare symposium downstairs, and I was like, I think you could just come up here and listen to what we have to say. But a multi-year grant from the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation to study inclusive entrepreneurship in Nebraska, and a fellowship from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank and Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities, where she studied the economic impact of anchor institutions. Without further ado, Josie Schafer.
Thank you. I make my team introduce me. That seems sad. I'm sorry. Morgan did all those projects too. Let's be clear. Thank you. Good morning. How are y'all? It's great. It is wonderful to be in person. I'm actually kind of an awkward person in person. So I was the holdout. The team was like, we need to go back in person. People really want it. And I was like, no. But we're doing it. And now I actually feel really good about it. So thank you so much for being here. Please yell, call out, ask questions as we go. I feel more comfortable when we are chatting together. There is food in the back of the room. I was just at an event where I had to sit for a very long time. I can't do it. I don't expect y'all to do it. Grab food, grab coffee. Feel free to move around as we go. But thank you so much for being here. Okay. We're going to start with updates on Census Bureau data products, and I'm going to focus on 2 particular products that have some interesting things going on right now. In the past, we used to have folks from the Census Bureau come in and do this. They were very willing to come in and do this, just timelines and schedules and all that kind of stuff. And I said, don't worry, because it's going to go right into the presentation. I have it, but they are an amazing group of people doing a lot of hard work to make sure we have access to great data. We actually had a visit from the Census Bureau director a couple months ago. That was really exciting. Came straight to Nebraska just to see us. Okay, 2 main products I'm going to talk about in this update is the population estimates and the American Community Survey. The population estimates is a very different product than you're probably used to seeing from the United States Census Bureau. It's been around for a very long time. It's an extremely important product. This is a statistical product as compared to a survey or a census, right? There is the decennial census, which is the count of every person in the United States every 10 years. That was 2020. I'm done talking about it. If you want to talk about it, we could talk about it more, but I feel like we've covered it other places. As a reminder, after a year, we make all the presentation materials from the previous data and research series available online. So if you do want to hear more decennial census stuff, you can go back the last couple of years and you'll be able to grab that. So, but in between this official count of everybody, we really need data about what's going on, and we need timely data. This is one of the biggest challenges I have when I present census data. People are like, but what about right now? I'm like, it doesn't change that much, calm down. But there are some things that are on the move, and so we need really timely data. So the population estimates uses a statistical process to be able to estimate the total population by state, county, and city. And then we get some of the components of population change. There are 3 components of population change. We're going to talk all about them today, so I won't go into detail yet. And the characteristics of the population, age, and race and ethnicity. And that's because those components, those characteristics of data are what we use to project population going forward. But the Census Bureau just provides an estimate for each year. So right now we have 2023 out, and then we will get 2024 in December, and then we'll get the city and county demographic characteristics in July. So that's the schedule release for that. I put those words in parentheses, in apostrophes, because it can be really hard to navigate the population estimates website, in my opinion, compared, for instance, to going onto data.census.gov. So I have linked the first one is sort of the main population estimates page, and they expect you to get to data from that page, but if you go there, you're gonna be like, what? You sure? So I actually, when I'm looking, I put what I'm looking for, either components of change or characteristics. I put in US Census Bureau population estimates characteristics, and that seems to get me where I want to go. So I linked those two as well, the components of change and the characteristics data. This is not a lot of data, right? This is very different than the American Community Survey that has that rich socio-demographic economic data. This is really just population, but it is much more timely and recent than the ACS. So this is what it looks like when you get to one of those pages and you are actually downloading Excel files. It is not like data.census.gov at all, where you are grabbing, you're kind of in a system and looking through different data tables that they've organized. You are downloading Excel files, and some of them are fairly easy to read. Some of them are a little bit more complicated. Depends on what vintage you bring up or how much data is in the particular file. This is more for the data nerds that really need that information. So I've worked with the Division of Health and Human Services is working on a dashboard about population, right? We use this because of the timeliness and what they're trying to do in terms of information. Anybody else use population estimates? How do you use it?
Just to put it out on my website.
Okay.
I have city, county, whatever I can get, I put on there. I have data back to 1915.
Amazing.
People want to see. Yeah.
Great. Where do you work? Sorry, Doris.
State of Nebraska with energy.
Okay.
Energy statistics, population was a big.
Right. Absolutely. Population uses energy, so we want to know how has the population changed as compared to our energy usage. I kind of say population estimates is a great denominator for a lot of data work. Anybody else using population estimates?
We do the mappings as well.
Absolutely. So race, ethnicity data, and by age, right? There's an interesting thing that's happening, that has been happening for a long time, but younger people are more demographically diverse than older people in Nebraska. So we might want to just see overall race and ethnicity, which I'll show you today from the population estimates, but it might be even more interesting to look at race and ethnicity by age groups to see that change in our population, also important for population projections going forward. And so we might want that real level of detail. And they have 5-year age groups or a single year of age. ACS is never going to give single year of age groups. So if that's really important to you, which it is to some, Katie at First 5 Nebraska knows she really wants that single year of age group. Population estimates is your source. Population estimates right now is what we have the most recent data for. So I'm going to be presenting all about population estimates data today and some of the trends I'm seeing in that. And that's because ACS, we just had the 1-year release for, so September 14th of 2024, we just had the 2023 release of the 1-year data for American Community Survey. That was a lot of numbers. Let me talk about what that is. First, let's talk about the American Community Survey. I trust the American Community Survey. I have full confidence in the American Community Survey. I do for a lot of different reasons, but that 3.5 million respondents annually is why I have a lot of confidence. Let's compare that to a Pew Research poll, 1,500 respondents. Those numbers different? Yes, we passed our data cluster of the day. Okay, those numbers are very different. And everybody right now is getting a lot of political polls. Is anybody's phone blowing up as we speak? Yeah, I'm kind of over it. Those polls probably have less than 1,500 respondents in the whole country. Okay, so that's why polls are far less accurate. They are far less accurate. They are much smaller sample sizes. They try for large sample sizes, but they are much smaller sample sizes. They also tend to be much more biased samples in terms of who they can access to answer questions versus what goes on at the Census Bureau to truly have a wide and random sample. It is becoming an issue. That's why later in the day, we are talking in that panel about confidence in data and reliability in data. And that's because sample sizes are getting smaller. The Census Bureau is telling us it is getting much harder to get people to answer the American Community Survey. But if you get one, please take it. I get calls all the time at the office. They're like, should I take this? And I'm like, well, what are you looking at? And they say what it is. I'm like, yes, please, it's amazing. And why are you calling me? I can't help you. But I'm glad they found somebody that will tell them to take it. Please, if you do anything, leave this room today and tell people to take the American Community Survey. If you got it, has anybody ever gotten it? I haven't. Oh, Morgan's got one. That's fun. All right, that's exciting. Yeah, good random sample. We like it. It was spread out across the room. That's how random works now. Okay, it is a depth of survey. Okay, but it's 2024 right now. I think I'm right about that. We just got the 2023 1 year. So 1 year of data is truly just the 3.5 million respondents that went in that 1 year of data. That seems like a lot, but because the Census Bureau is really good at their jobs, they believe they cannot report that data with confidence for geographies lower than 65,000 people. In Nebraska, we have a lot of geographies that are less than 65,000 people. So we don't get a ton of data. We don't look at the 1 years very much. We at the Center for Public Affairs Research kind of take the stance. We want people to be able to compare data. And so if we talk a lot about the 1 year, we can't show a lot of data. And so then I'd be showing 1 year data and 5 year data all the time. And that gets confusing. So we tend to do our big, let's talk about what's new in the American Community Survey after the release. The release schedules have gotten all messed up since COVID. It used to be earlier, now it's later. Whatever, we're going to come back in December and we're going to talk about the data from the American Community Survey when we have that 5 year release. Couple different ways to access that I want to make you aware of. Data.census.gov. Who spends time on data.census.gov? Yeah, you wouldn't come to this conference if you didn't, right? There's no reason to be here. Give me a thumbs up if you like data.census.gov. Little lesser than the actual users. It's a non-perfect system. They all are. Who likes it better than what used to be American Fact Finder? We get a couple. It's funny. I use data.census.gov very similarly to how I used American Fact Finder, and that's actually helped me. But you got to imagine the people that made that. So they had something stuck in their head. We'll try to give you some tricks. I'll also mention cpar.unomaha.edu, our state data center page. We put out an infographic on sort of the things we get a lot of questions about in terms of the American Community Survey. And we have that data for Nebraska and counties, and we have it going back to 2012. So 2012 to 2022 of the 5 year estimates is up right now. It probably answers a lot of questions for you. We also have a county map where you can compare counties on all those same stats. So that might be helpful for you if you do not want to go in data.census.gov, which I think is fair. I also will talk a little bit about, we just did this 6 regions, 1 Nebraska initiative. We put a lot of data from the American Community Survey into a data book by county. And that's all the 2022 5 year. So I can't imagine there is any data you need that between the SDC page and the 6 regions, 1 Nebraska data books that you would even have to go to data.census.gov. So that data is out there. We're going to talk a little bit more about it as well. Now, and then we'll come back in December and we'll do a big update on the 2023 5 year. We won't be in person for that because it's December, friends. I can't deal with those logistics, but we'll have the opportunity to make sure you have that data. That data, so this is from the Census Bureau about what data is in there. Pretty much if you're thinking about census data, you're actually probably thinking about American Community Survey data, right? Social, economic, demographic, housing, Do people rent or own? What's the value of their home? What's the value of their mortgage minus utilities? What's the value of their utilities? It gets really crazy. Place of birth, school enrollment, all of that workforce data that we've become really well known for putting out, that's all really coming from that. We just did this healthcare workforce report for the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and a lot of that data was from the Census Bureau. What occupations are they in with a high level of detail using microdata? What are the wages they're making? Are they in rural places or are they in urban places? Things like that we can do with American Community Survey. So you probably want American Community Survey data, but you're here today to talk about population estimates data. This is that 6 regions, 1 Nebraska data I was talking about. These, in addition to the American Community Survey, we had great data partners bringing a lot of new data together. First 5 Nebraska, NSWERS. It was really exciting. Department of Labor. So we put that big data book together, but you know, who likes to look at Nebraska migration data? Yeah, you guys love it. Come on. We have a ton of that migration data. We have migration data by age in that data book. I don't think most people have actually seen that for Nebraska broken down by county. It's in there. So if you are really looking for a high level of detail in some of that American Community Survey, that 2022 data is out. We also go back in points of time, 2012. Sometimes we pool 2018 to 2022. We do all sorts of things to make sure you have a lot of data to explain what's going on. So that's American Community Survey. Oh, almost done. Just kidding. Here's my big tip for American Community Survey in data.census.gov. This is the demographic profiles. Anybody know demographic profiles? I put in DP0 in the search bar. Now, that is not how they tell you to use the search bar. They specifically tell you, just put in any topic. Yeah, it does not work. You will get some weird places. You will think there is not data because like it just takes you on a roller coaster. DP0 stands for demographic profile, and then there are a couple different ones. There's an economic, there's a housing, there's a social characteristics, and there's a demographic estimates. Usually, between those 4 tables, you can find what you want. There is a lot of information within those 4 tables. So you can see, I kind of just wanted to show you those DPs. 04, 03, 05, 02, that's too much for me to remember. So I just put in DP0 in the search bar and I get to those. Right now it is defaulting to 2023 1 year. I don't suggest using it because most of our geographies really don't. 1 year versus 5-year data. So 1 year is those 3.5 million respondents for that 1 year. The 5-year data is, they use data for 5 years. They don't just take an average of the data over 5 years. It's for the year. They want to give you data for 2022 or 2023 when we get there, but they want to have confidence in that data. They do not want a poll that's going to go, oh, today it's this and tomorrow it's that, right? Because that's what polls will do. It's too small a sample to have confidence. So they are pooling the data and they're using some weighting algorithms to be able to say, yeah, that's actually the number. Because the thing about people is it really doesn't change that much year to year, right? There is sort of this constancy. So by pooling the data, they get a little bit more confidence that that number for that year that they're reporting is the actual number. And they only release it for small geographies because they need that extra data, right? It's very few people in these smaller geographies, some counties with 320 something people, right? Not that many people are taking the ACS. So they need that 5 years of data to have a lot of confidence. So that's the difference. You can see just to compare, this is 2022 ACS 1 year on top. I didn't do the 2023 because I thought it would be confusing. They have the population at 1,967,923. The 2022 5-year has it down a little bit, 1,958,939. This is also what happens. People will just report some data point and they're like, I didn't see that in the data. It's probably 1 year versus 5 year. That's my best guess most of the time when they're different. The other thing that the ACS does is they put out a comparative profile. This looks at data change over time. Is there a significant difference in a data point throughout these DP tables between the 2 years. So this I do want to look at in brief for the 2023 1 year, just to give you a little sense of what's going on in Nebraska, and actually really positive stuff. So again, this is, I don't know how to get to the comparative profile table other than to say, CP, you're fine. It's allergy season, ma'am. So I put in CP, and this is what the table looks like, and they give you that statistically significant star. There's actually a difference, right? Two numbers can look different, but when you go deep into that data, are they really different, or is it just a small difference based on survey responses? So they actually tell me what's really up or down for this year. So I just went through those 4 tables and did a quick summary. We're not going to spend a ton of time on ACS data, but I know people want the newest data from us. So this is very new, right? September 14th release. Population 65 years and older is up. Total population that identifies as Latino, Latina is up. Not a big number, but it is significant. I only pulled out the ones that are significant. There are some that are significant I didn't pull out. I just didn't think you'd care that much. There's that much data. Now you might actually get to the point where you do not care. Total population 2 or more races is up. Total population that is white, in contrast, is down. Total households is up significantly. We are about to get into the population estimates things. Things are looking good. We're in a little bit of a growth trajectory. Average household size is down. Fertility among this particular group of people, I hope we don't make 50-year-olds have children, but if they want them, that's wonderful. But that number is down. Enrolled in elementary school is up. This is one of those things you might think, oh, we're an aging population, people going into schools, that number is lower. It is not lower. We have more kids today as a percentage of our that population enrolled in school. Foreign-born population that entered 2010 or later, so before 2010, that number is up. So after 2010 or after, excuse me. And households with broadband internet is up. We talk about internet a lot in the state. Actually, that's a pretty high rate of people that have internet. Now, if it's good, I don't know, but I mean, I don't think mine is good. So some significant changes in the economic and housing tables. I'm giving you those numbers. So if you want to go find this, you can go find this, and it'd be much easier than actually keyword searching things. In the labor force, if it couldn't get higher, it did. Females in the labor force, if it couldn't get higher, we were like number 2 or 3 in the country on this metric already. It went up. Work from home entirely remote went down. Shocking? No. So the ACS on this particular question, we have an infographic out about this. I won't update it till the 5-year. But as a function of our workforce mix, we don't have a lot of people working in jobs that easily go remote. And the question right now is really about entirely remote. We don't have a lot of hybrid.
No,
yep.
That was my question. Is it work from home or entirely remote?
It is.
Getting stuck on, if you wouldn't hear about Amazon's thing, people are treating it as such a binary that you're in the office, you're on remote, and it's a lot of it.
No, the scale is really.
Higher span.
Yep.
Any work from home or 100%.
Right. Those are very different. And think about it, right? Most people really do work hybrid, because right now maybe you work remote, but you're here in person for that, right? So you're not entirely remote. And that's really where most Nebraskans are. We just released a survey with the Greater Omaha Chamber Young Professionals Group, as well as their commitment to Opportunity, Diversity, and Equity Code. And we asked this question of about 600 young professionals. Shocking results. Okay, so we asked about hybrid. So we asked, what is your current situation and what do you want to do? Did you take the survey? You don't have to tell me. You're smiling, then I like it. Okay, so most people right now that responded to that survey, much smaller sample, 650 versus 3.5 million, right? And much more biased sample. It was really just Omaha young professionals, which I guess I don't count in. I thought that was a hard day for me. So most say they are hybrid, equally split between in-person and online. Who would say they're in that group? Equally split, hybrid and in-person. Okay. I mean, I am not allowed to vote. Not young, got it. Okay, so actually then we asked, what do you want? And there was a large group, particularly younger workers, that wanted to be fully in person. Younger workers were more likely to be fully in person, right? They wanted the opportunity for networking and promotion and advancement and learning. And then you get to our age and we're like, bye, get to go, have kids, right? So we saw that in the age groups, but if most people were primarily split, hybrid and in person, they really just wanted to be hybrid, but primarily remote. So I told the executive board, it's a one-day change in your schedule and you are matching what most people want. So that's pretty exciting. But back to here, they released that, they did a press release yesterday, Tara? Sorry, Tara's working. I think it was yesterday. So that data will, okay, so that data will be out in the world soon. I was not allowed to release it myself, but we will see that soon. Be checking our website for more updates on that. Work from home entirely remote is down. I'm not shocked. We just don't have a lot of remote work here. What we can expect though is that you're not gonna have a bunch of remote workers move here if we don't do it. Work in the construction industry is down, and it's down significantly, and that is pretty scary. I was out all summer talking about how much we need housing in order to get people to stay here and have a good quality of life here, because housing costs are rising so rapidly everywhere, but everyone's like, we have a good cost of living, not when it comes to housing. So that was surprising to see. Flip side, total households earning $75,000 to $99,000 a year. That number is up and up significantly. Median household income is up. This is great news. Households receiving cash public assistance is down. That kind of makes sense. People are making a little bit more. People are less reliant on other forms of income. Families with children under 18 below the poverty level, we are down. Really great news. Total housing units, despite that construction snafu, is up. Housing units built 2020 or later, that is up. That's a significant number up. So we are getting the message about building housing. We are just not building enough yet to meet our needs. Value of owner-occupied housing units is in that 500 to 999,000 category is up. So when we build them nice. We make it nice. What do you think? Between these two slides, 2023, 1 year, is Nebraska on a good trajectory? I find this very promising. This one in particular, the economic and housing one. I'm a little bit excited about some things to come, and we'll see some more of that data. Again, hard to compare this to other places, hard to report this for most of our geographies because that 1 year data is not released. You really get Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster, that's it. Do you get Hall? I do think you get Hall. Okay, couple other updates from the United States Census Bureau. I'm sure I'm already behind. Ongoing efforts to refine data. There are some big changes coming in two really interesting areas at the Census Bureau. Right now, when we ask about race and ethnicity, we do it in two blocks. We ask you your racial group. Are you white? Are you African American or Black? Are you Asian, Native Hawaiian, Native American, a couple other groups there, right? That's race. And then we ask about your ethnicity, but we really care about a particular ethnicity, being Latino, Latina, or Hispanic, right? So we've been doing that in two blocks. But we find Latino, Latina does not answer the race question. Latino, Latina at a high rate. So Latino, Latina is an ethnicity. The other ones are race. Race is a social construct, and sometimes people don't think so much about what race they identify, and they really talk about their ethnicity. So we've been doing that in two separate questions, and we have been getting data back, right? And Census Bureau doesn't want data. It's a formal statistical term. It's very important. Please people all the time. So they are going to combine those questions. That, you know, we're not changing the construct, but we're going to ask the question in a different way. The other thing that's really interesting, we have a lot more people identifying in that 2 or more race ethnicity category. And it's been kind of difficult over time to explain that. It's people, young people are more diverse than we are, right? And so that increase in that has a lot to do with how they answer the question. It also has a lot to do with how we've been asking the question and the fact that we are becoming more demographically diverse. So the changes to the question there are really to better get at how people identify today versus how we sort of constructed these IDs a long time ago. It's going to be hard if you're tracking data over time.
Dr. Schafer, so how do you collect, how do you collect 2 or more races data into the race and ethnicity? 2 and more races, because the number of in our population, census population number, the population size is growing.
Yes.
Compared to 2010 to 2020. It's like not in here. So
Yeah.
I'm just.
So the population estimates, right, does it statistically versus the survey. Now they do a lot of non-response follow-up. They're still coding the write-in responses to the 2020 census. So if you chose not to check any box and then explain how you identify, which is a lovely thing that you can do, great for survey researchers, they are still actually classifying that, right? So we don't have all that data. We have enough to have confidence in where we're at. The population estimates reports if you are that race alone. So I identify as white alone, and you get that word alone in that variable. So you have that, and then you can collapse into, from the population estimates, you can collapse into the 2 or more category, or they're going to tell you in the population estimates, which is why that Excel file is not that fun to work with. If someone is Black and white, if someone is Latino, so then they have Latino alone, and then they have Latino with the race groups too. So in the population estimates, you get every category. If someone says they're 3 or more, you're going to actually get what that 3 or more is.
For example, we have like races, Black, white, and Asian, and Asia Pacific Islanders, and all those. Then we have one Hispanic. So we say that, okay, white, not Hispanic, Black, not Hispanic, Asian, not Hispanic. When I am looking at 2 and more races, where I will go and consider those not Asian, not Hispanic.
You would not put the Hispanic in the 2 or more races group. You would just look where they're doing Black, Asian, white, Native American. That goes in 2 or more races. Hispanic, Latino, Latina is an ethnicity. So we do that alone, or we do that with race, but we don't count Latino as 2 or more races. Does that make any sense? I mean, have we lost? Are we like losing everyone right now?
Thank you. Because so if they are saying that I am also white, and then my ancestors were Black, and my grand ancestors were Asian, suppose 3. So how it is considered into the survey?
Okay, so American Community Survey, you identify, you self-identify. So you say, I am this. What we're finding, why we're seeing more people at 2 or more races, my age group, I might have just been like, I'm white. But a younger age group might think a little bit more, with a little bit more complexity around how they identify. And so that's why they're reporting 2 or more. This is really getting in the weeds, sorry. So they're saying 2 or more often than we've seen that. They're also more likely to be demographically diverse. So in the survey data along with administrative records are used to do the population estimates. So they are just calculating in those groups, and that's why they do the alone and they do all the racial breakdowns, because they have the data to just say, I estimate this to be what's in that group.
Thank you so much.
Gosh, no, that we can talk more about it. But if you go into the population estimates characteristics file, you are going to see more race ethnicity categories than you thought ever possible. But that's great. The other one on the ACS that is going through some research is about sexual orientation. We are probably going to see a sexual orientation question very soon. This is the household pulse survey. We don't use the pulse survey very much. It's interesting though. Does anybody use the household pulse survey? Yeah, it's interesting. They are already asking the sexual orientation question. They will ask if someone is bisexual, gay, or lesbian, straight, something else, or I don't know, adults aged 18 and over. They are doing testing on that question now. Right now, what we have, you can identify as being a same-sex household, but you would have to live with someone of the same sex for us to say, okay, that's a same-sex household right now. So that can be identified in the ACS currently, but there is no sexual orientation question. Household Pulse also asks a gender identity question. It is possible the ACS will adopt this in time, but they don't have current plans. The sexual orientation question is being tested right now. It'll probably show up very soon. It is out in the world. So some people are getting an ACS with that question on. Not everyone's getting it with theirs, so they can compare responses and see if they're getting close. But that one will eventually be on the survey. And I imagine the gender identity one will be as well, but I don't know the timing of that. But the sexual orientation question is rolling out. These are some other products from the United States Census Bureau. There is a list of 139 things that people use from the United States Census Bureau. So if you want data, I think it's out there. Just a couple mentions. The current population survey is a product of the Bureau of Labor, as well as the United States Census Bureau. When I came about 6 years ago, I started using that pretty heavily because I was really interested in workforce. It is a monthly survey set. They follow some people over time, so you can get some time series. They ask questions about COVID and work. They are a little bit more flexible than the Census Bureau. They add questions, they take off questions, so we really get really interesting data. We have a housing infographic about why people move. Housing, it used to really be driven by job and opportunity. Housing has recently come up on the list of things, why people move. School system finances is out for FY 2022-2023. I was on Monday with the planning committee of the Nebraska State Legislature, and we were looking at per pupil spending by school district size. Small school districts spend more. That's the point there, but I was able to look at national data around that. Building permit survey, very hot topic. Omaha Chamber, City of Omaha, they ask for it all the time. It's right out there. I think maybe May or June 2024 is out on that building permit survey. Household Pulse survey is just kind of like, how you feeling? Do you have enough food to eat? It's really interesting. Has questions about remote work that get into the more hybrid aspects of remote work. Much smaller sample size, but they're able to release more timely data out through 2024 there. County business patterns in the 6 Regions, 1 Nebraska initiative, we look a lot at number of establishments, size of businesses, where people work, that kind of stuff, county business patterns, as well as quarterly census for employment and wages from BLS. Really interesting data in there. There is pretty new data out through 2024 on that. But we use this program a lot called On the Map. Everybody's interested in where someone lives versus where someone works. Interestingly, we released this. More people live in Iowa and work in Nebraska than live in Nebraska and work in Iowa. Does that make sense to y'all? Glad it does to someone. So we have an infographic out about that. That's only data through 2021, but it's a really easy system to use, right? So Census Bureau puts out the data and then they sometimes create a system to make that data very usable. That one's called On the Map. Anybody interested in learning more about any of these surveys in the future? Screaming out. Which one? On the Map. It is fun. I don't know what I'm doing, but I enjoy the idea. Yeah.
The building permit survey, is that reported from county assessor's office?
It is reported from counties. Yeah, so, right, sometimes I say to people, just go ask, right? Like you could get it that way too, but some counties are less friendly that way. So the building permit survey is very nice. And they have, gosh, I'm gonna screw up names, but right, like if it's permitted, if it's actually being built, and around the price range. So you get some pretty good data. Certain geographies can be hard there, but there's lots of data in that. Question online. Oh, he needs a mic. Jungmin, will you bring Clay a mic? Thank you.
Hi, we have a question from one of our online attendees. This is from Liz Badgent. She says, what's the relationship between the PEP housing estimates and the building permit surveys?
Ooh. So I'm going to have to look more closely. The short answer to everything is they're looking at administrative records, which is county business patterns. They do also look at survey data to make sure like something isn't wildly, like you can't build all of that in one day. So I imagine there's someone at the Census Bureau whose job is to make sure those are clicking, but I'd have to do more research on that. I've never looked at it. All 139 products, not that knowledgeable about. Okay. That's the update. It was more than an update, but I think we had a good conversation about where we are today from those survey products. Yes, sir. Yeah, please.
So I
Switch it on. We have it. There are mics in the ceiling. Thank you.
okay. So I said I came in a bit late. So, but when I came in, I saw you're mentioning something around 1 year and 5 year estimate. So I don't know if you've mentioned it, but I'm trying to pull up a data as regarding educational attainment across the zip code in the US.
Yeah.
So what I notice is I just have two questions.
Okay.
When is the best time to use the 1 year estimate and 5 years? And when you are trying to pull a data across zip code and you didn't see the option of 1 year and 5 years. So what estimate did they use?
Okay.
Because I was trying to look for data for year 2022.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So they do not release 1 year data for populations less than 65,000. So I'm going to guess a lot of zip codes would not be released. Also, do you know about this sort of zip code approximation thing? Yeah, it's another fun Census Bureau thing. We're about to talk about geographies. So they are probably not releasing 1 year for the zip codes, especially if you're going all over the place. So I would definitely use the 5 year. I would not use the 1 year for the zip code you have and then the 5 year for the other zip codes. I don't compare across. I do not compare 1 year to 5 year. I just don't do it. Everyone's got their hang up. That one's mine, right? So I would wait till you have the 5 year, which 2022 5 year data is out, and it should be across all zip codes. But let's remember, the Census Bureau will not release data if they think you can identify them. And every time we add a variable, we are funneling data down. So you may get to a point where even for that zip code, even in the 5 year data, that data is not going to be reported. So let's say you want number of people that are in poverty and Asian by zip code. You may still come up with a bunch of you just get a no. There's just no data there. Also, this new differential privacy rule, I couldn't explain it if I tried, so I'm not going to do it. But as you get to those smaller geographies, they're actually placing people, they're not reporting things. This is just in the survey products, not the decennial census-ish. Don't worry about the ish. So when you're a really small geographies, it can be hard to identify when you add in all those layers. So just remember, smaller geographies, you need a bigger group. You want to look at something bigger to make sure you have the data. Smaller geographies, you absolutely want to use 5 year data. There's a camera in the back, so I got to do my hair real quick. You want to use 5 year data. Does that help?
Yeah.
Be careful, because every time you change tables on data.census.gov, it switches back to 2023 1 year. It really wants you to have the newest data. And you're like, I'm looking at something and I know it really well. And then it just, no, you're confused. So that happens often too. It defaults back to that 1 year, even if you think you know what you're looking at. Okay. let's talk a little bit about our population. Where are you from? Don't scream it out to me, but just think in your head how you would describe that to people. Assume you don't need. Oh, no, don't scream. No screaming. We're going to scream in a second. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. Let's see if I know how to work a battery. Okay. So, did anybody say a country? When I say where are you from, did anybody mention the country? No, like USA, USA. No. You mentioned a country. Great. Does anybody say the state? What state are you from, Al? Nebraska. Thank God. We have to keep all of you here. That's the only lesson to take away. Not allowed to leave. Who else said state? We're Indiana. Is it because you're from a different state?
Nebraska, but from habit of moving around.
Okay. All right. Because you lived in different places in Nebraska. Interesting. Who said a county? Really? Okay. A region. Great. Sorry. I dropped off region. That's interesting. Panhandle region. Definitely. Who did say a county? Nobody, right? Yeah. Nobody talks about their county. Who said a city? Who said a neighborhood within a city? Yeah? Where are you from?
Old Market.
Old Market, like it. Anybody else neighborhood? All right, who didn't answer? I feel like a bunch of you. Town versus city, fair. We call them places in geography and Census Bureau talk. Where'd you say?
I moved a lot, so I just said Midwest.
Midwest, regional again, but a different region. Got it.
My answer depends on the audience. In this room with a whole bunch of Omaha people, I don't even bother giving my town name.
Right, because what?
I lived in Omaha for 14 years, but they won't know where it is.
Oh, I'm interested.
Well, it's by Kearney. They might know where Kearney is. They won't know where the little.
Oh, so like I say a place by saying some other place. That's interesting. That's an interesting one. So in surveys, not in surveys, but it was when we ask people, most people say city. Does that make sense to you? Why do you think people say city? Or city or town or place? Go for it. Yeah. We don't know if mics work at this point. We're just having fun.
So I feel like cities, one, have like independent cultural groups or like small cultural factors from each other, but I did have a separate, I guess, question.
We have the mic now. Keep going.
Well, just like with the cities, is there, I guess, data about when you have like larger cities and like satellite things in like metro? Because I'm from San Diego, but technically county, but because the way like California works, everything is in a large county, and San Diego is actually only a small city.
Right.
But everyone.
So people will say things like the suburbs, and they won't even identify the city because people in a room kind of get that's what place we're talking about. So that's kind of interesting too, right? And it's not, I think a lot of people would classify that under neighborhood, but a lot of times we don't even identify the actual place because people are so aware of what we're talking about. And that's this idea of place and place attachment. And I find place and place attachment comes up a lot in Census Bureau data talk, even though like the Census Bureau don't talk about place and place attachment, right? There's no questions that really get at this idea of, do you like your place? Are things going well, right? There's no quality of life questions. There's no, so on that Greater Omaha Chamber, we asked, how do you feel about the city of Omaha? Do you like Parks and Rec? Do you like entertainment? Do you like restaurants and bars, right? There's nothing on the survey that does that. But I feel that when people are looking at census data, they're really doing it from a place of place attachment. This is that idea that we bond with the place that we live, right? We have a place we call home, right? And if that's a city, a town, a state, it's a meaningful word to us. And we ascribe parts of our identity really to that place where we live. And that's why city tends to be that place. We talk about city, town, or village. They're all accepted here, right? Because we sort of live within a cluster of folks that in some way we are like. If anything, if we're nothing alike, we still share a place, and this idea of place attachment. I think this is a really important explanation of behavior. It's a really important explanation of demographics, right? We can actually start to use geography to predict behavior. There's a lot of work using census data matched with Facebook data right now called opportunityinsights.org. Anybody played with it? Data by Raj Teddy. It's amazing. That finds that people that live in a city actually share a lot of characteristics just beyond these demographic characteristics and into these sort of Facebook behaviors, friending behaviors, economic behaviors. We are saying that your zip code tells us more about how much money you're going to make in 100 years than it does, 35 years, whatever the number is, than some other thing, right? We are finding geography really, really matters. Anybody, oh, I never asked that one. Did anybody say their zip code? No. Yeah, and so this is what becomes a real problem for me when I'm talking to people that use census data. The geographies that we have data available for and are really useful for explanations. I think about nonprofits a lot who are writing grants. You want to talk about a homeless population in an area that you're serving. That area you're serving is not Douglas County. It's not Sarpy County. It's right. It's really small. And they're actually not necessarily from there, right? But they've come to you from help. And you want data to say, this is a portion of that population. I don't know. And I especially don't know at this really small level of geography. So these ideas we have in our head about what is an important geography to explain what we're doing, to explain what we're seeing in the world, and the idea of census geography, they rarely align. This is the census geography hierarchy. They've been using the same picture longer than I am alive. I am sure of it. This is it. This is what they got. They have data for the US. Data from the US goes out to this idea of zip code tabulation areas. They are very close to zip codes, but they're not exactly zip codes because the post office and the Census Bureau don't work together. They also will report data for urban areas, metropolitan and micropolitan areas. They will report data for regions, not usually regions we think of. I'll show you PUMAs, public use microdata areas. I love them as regional areas, but they don't make any sense to people. We have states. Within states, you're going to get places, school districts, congressional districts. Those public use microdata areas can be national or they can be within a state. School districts, congressional districts. How many school districts do we have? I'm sick of mapping it. I'm all good. You want data by school district, you're on your own. And we have some really small school districts too. So talk about not having 1 year data in it. State legislative districts, that data is now out by state legislative districts after the new data for redistricting. So that is now available. We usually do a dashboard on that. I haven't updated yet. Congressional districts, county subdivisions. Then these last two, census tracts and block groups. I got to keep it moving. Oh, wow. We have a lot to do in 10 minutes. This is where you could start to build to the, you could start to build up to a neighborhood level, but very little data is really released. Block groups, you can only get decennial census data. And census tracts, I really don't think people should be working with. Does it matter? Is it different by these geographies? Yeah, things are really different. So this is the under age 5. Who uses the mapping feature in data.census.gov? Y'all should. Do you want a class on that? It's good, actually. It's pretty useful. So Douglas County under age 5, 7.1% of the population. City of Omaha, 6.9% of the population. I don't even remember what that is. Oh, that's zip code tabulation area. My zip code, 5.5% of the population. Douglas County Census Tract, 4.6% of the population. It definitely matters, right? If you needed that stat, and that stat was really important, there's our public use microdata areas. That stat was important to you, it would matter what geography you reported at. But we don't have every geography everybody wants for every stat. It's a challenge. Here's regions. This was the 6 regions, 1 Nebraska. So what is the correct unit of analysis for your geography? We're going to take one question, then we're going to keep moving.
Hi, thanks, Josie. Liz would like to hear more about why people shouldn't be working with census tracts.
Because they're small. Because they're small. And if we go back to that conversation we were having, smaller data has a bigger margin of error. I don't put margin of error on a lot of the data that I'm showing, but I don't report things that have big margin of error. I'm not looking at it. If that made sense. I look at it and I report things I have confidence that can be reported. Once you get down to that census tract level and you start to do 2 variables at the same time, that's going to be problematic, right? It's going to have big margin of error. Okay, I want to get into some of the population estimates data. That's actually what we came here for. This is 2010 to 2020, right? Grew by 7.4%, but 69 counties lost population over that last decade, right? And it was very much a rural population loss situation. Very few counties, all with some city of some size growing. This is since 2020 from the population estimate. So 2020 to 2023, that's the newest data out. What is going on? Now, they're small counties, so those are pretty small numbers in terms of overall population change, right? Sioux County with 23 more people, like they may not feel it day to day, but that's a significant population shift in just 3 years. And we're seeing that spread out. It's consistent. It was 20 to 2021, and it was 2021 to 2022, and 2022 to 23. A couple of these rural counties that have been negative for a really long time are starting to pop off. So I'm interested in that. I say that, but I'll moderate that. When I look at this slide, which we've been showing forever, this is the percent of folks in the state that live in a metropolitan county, that includes those outlying counties like Cass and Washington, versus a non-metropolitan county. We're still on that growth trajectory. 66% in 2023 lived in those metro counties. So this isn't a just total change in how we live, but all of a sudden we're starting to get a little movement in rural Nebraska, and that's been something we've been talking about for a while. What we're seeing, so there's 2 explanations I have for this. One is this exurb movement. So for years, people have been leaving core central cities like Omaha and moving to first ring suburbs, Papillion, La Vista, Gretna. Here in this data, this is 2022 to 2023. This is the first year in a while we've seen them kind of stall. I'm not going to call it decline because there is a margin of error here, and that's, you know, they're just stalling. And the exurbs, the farther out places, Wahoo Valley, Fremont, Ashland, Plattsmouth, are starting to grow. It's even more noticeable around Lincoln. Lincoln's still growing. We have huge influx of young people into Lincoln every year. Look for that in the 6 regions, 1 Nebraska data. But look at those places: Seward, Crete, Hickman, Syracuse. These are not places that we are known for growth. These are not places in Nebraska we're like popping off. We are starting to see a little movement in these exurbs. Most of these, though, are in those outlying metro counties. We're not getting a ton of movement way out, but we're starting to get some movement. This is a national trend. We think this has a lot to do with COVID. People are working hybrid, primarily in person, but a little bit remote, which means I can move a little farther out, usually around housing, which is why housing is so important to us. But we see cities across the state. There's 500 and something places, cities and villages. There's 159 places that count as cities in Nebraska. They are all shown here. I've labeled the ones where the city is growing faster than the county, 2020 to 2023. And we're seeing movement farther out. We're seeing movement farther out. I wish we could spend a lot of time talking about the economic development implications of this, but my main point is something's working. When I moved here, we were complaining about rural depopulation. Then we started doing something about rural depopulation, and it worked. That's actually rare, friends. That's rare. This is a national trend too, though. We're seeing people leave totally rural and moving into cities. Population change happens in 3 ways. We're going to break these down for Nebraska. First one is natural change. It's births minus deaths. Nebraska is always highly positive for this one. This is the 5-year age groups. The ratio of under age 5 to 85 is 3-to-1. Go back to 1980 and it was closer to 5-to-1. We really liked those days. Natural change was very good there, but we are still positive at 3-to-1. I'm going to skip that for right now. That puts us number 6th in the country if we take natural change as a percent of population. Nebraskans are having more Nebraskans, and that is our source of population growth. And that's true around the state. Now, if you look over here in the urban areas where there's more population, you don't need much natural change as a percentage of population to really grow the population. So we're really driving it over here. But if you kind of look up in that Northeast region, I think there's some interesting numbers there too. We're seeing natural change, more young people compared to deaths. Now, if you go back to this, it's not going to last forever because that under 5 group is smaller than some of those other groups, and we expect that to continue to happen. Net domestic migration. This is the one everyone goes crazy about because it is consistently negative. This one from the population estimates includes county to county migration and includes out-of-state migration. When I use the ACS data, I break those down into 2 categories. You can't do it with population estimates. But I have really good news, friends. After hitting a big low, right, everyone thought everybody would stop really moving around. We've come up. Now, brain drain, that idea of out-migration of just folks 25 years and older with a bachelor's degree could still be up. I don't expect it to be based on overall domestic net migration being out, but I do brain drain with ACS 5-year data, so we don't have that today. We'll have it in December. But domestic net migration is still negative, but it is not as negative as it has been. Good story, right? When we put it in context of the entire country and the Midwest, actually pretty strong. South Dakota is still pulling in a lot of people, but stronger than Kansas and Iowa. And Iowa kind of flip-flops on this. Sometimes it's actually positive. Kansas has pretty consistently been negative, but it's kind of leveled out. It's now higher than us. So this is the first time in a long time. Yeah, it's negative, but it's not that bad. And you can see some counties actually pulling people from other counties or other states. Wild. Gage County, wild. So most of the growth in the counties is natural change, but we have a couple counties, Sioux County out there, I think is another big positive one, that are now pulling people from other places. This is a total shift from the last decade. This is a really big change in behavior. Something good is happening out there.
And I would guess if you look, it's probably like
right next to Wyoming. So it could be movement within there. There's also that proximity to the Front Range, Wyoming and Colorado. And I was out in Western Nebraska, and there's some interesting things going on that would make folks think, not so bad. Net international migration, net international migration. This has always been a small but positive source of growth for us. Not huge numbers. Compare that to other states in raw numbers and as a percent of the population. 5,441 folks from other countries came in. Look at what's going on in Texas. Look at what's going on in Colorado, in California, Florida, right? So in terms of overall numbers, it is not big numbers, but a still consistent source of growth for us. Take it away, and we're natural change alone because we're not getting people from other states. You can see this around the state as well. Not huge numbers, but I think a lot of people think really it's driven just by urban places, and that is not what we're seeing. We're seeing that growth across the state. I don't leave a presentation without saying this because I think it's really important. When someone moves from another state or another country, economic opportunity is going to be really important for them. And let me tell you, it really is. The foreign-born population in Nebraska has a higher labor force participation rate than those that were native born in Nebraska, that were born in the US. So guess who's working? guess who, when we pull them out of the labor force, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Most of those folks are from Latin America. That's where most of our international migration comes from, just over 50%, but we have a lot of diversity in that foreign-born group too. We have a whole infographic online about the foreign-born population in Nebraska if you want to learn more. What I want to tell you is our diversity in the state is not totally driven by foreign-born. This is one of our infographics, and if you compare 2012 to 2022, that foreign-born population has increased, but the Latina population has increased more, and they're not the same number. So every person that is diverse is not born in another country. It's a really important point to make in a state that is rapidly diversifying. So that's why I'll just kind of jump into the characteristics file of the population estimate. This is the percent of the population that identifies as a person of color. By county, it's 508,000 total people, 25.7% of the state. That is really increasing rapidly. If we look at it by age group, younger folks are more diverse. But again, you see, this isn't like, oh, just the urban areas, just the metro areas. This diversity is out throughout the state. This looks at an important, take just a minute. I'm gonna finish close on time, Tara. I got this. This looks, I swear, this is population change 20 to 23. So those same group of counties you saw in that first map I showed you, population change 20 to 23. And this is change in the BIPOC population, persons of color. So go all the way out there and you have a couple counties that are growing and they're a little bit more diverse over that time period. You have a couple counties that are not growing and are not very diverse. Look what you have in the middle. Those are counties that are just growing a little bit, but they're growing a lot in diversity. So if we were to take that diversity away, what is happening to those counties, right? The source of growth is people of color. The source of growth in those rural areas that I was like, what is going on? Is actually people of color. Exciting rural frontier is what I'm seeing out of this data. Economic positive, looking at that 1 year estimates, but we're seeing a real change in who wants to be in our small towns and who's thriving in our small towns. Real difference. So all of this brought us to this effort. We wanted to project the population out. So right after the 2020 census, we did release some population projections by county. They didn't use the intercensal estimates. They didn't get super complicated around age groups and race ethnicity. They used sort of a standard modeling, just sort of updated for 2020. We have now really swung for it. And we gave you a high, medium, median, and low estimate for every county we pulled together. We have 5-year age groups for every county, and we have population of color, several different race ethnicity groups by county, projected out to 2067. I don't like projections because I'll tell you very clearly, if I knew the future, I wouldn't be hanging out with y'all. Like, I'd have somewhere to be. But we're going to give it a try. I like to say, right, this is what would happen if nothing changed, right? If we did nothing. Nebraskans tend to do stuff, so I don't know. But I really want to show you that natural change is really driving growth. And we are like actually in the boom time, right? Things are going really well now, driven by that natural change. But natural change can't go on forever. People age, people are aging, and they can age longer. We are doing a lot in healthcare to make sure folks can live and live and live, right? And we are having fewer children. It's a national trend. I'm not blaming Nebraskans, right? So that ratio right now that is so positive, that under age 5 to that over age 85, we don't expect to stay forever. We could kind of go through that map. So we used a cohort change model and we projected that out. And it is really plateauing. It is still growing. It is still growing because natural change is still a real positive feature of our population. The red line is the median. I'd focus there. And it's growing, but it really plateaus. So we're actually it's the best it's ever going to be if we do nothing in terms of overall population, right? And I've worked with a couple elected officials that are really excited about if we could just bring 10,000 more people here. Great. It's right now, that's it. That's all we're getting, because we really don't have high international migration and we don't really have domestic migration. So we really have to level that out. Also, younger people are more likely to move, so that kind of creates that weird shape in terms of our population pyramid. So that's what we're seeing, and that's what we can do with the population estimates data, right? They don't project out, we project out. So we've put these together. We are offering the Nebraska data to anybody who wants it. For the county data, with that level of detail I talked about, the age groups and the race ethnicity data, we are asking that folks help us recoup some of the time that goes into that work. So there's a QR code there if you're interested in getting more of that data. Talked really fast at the end, I'm sorry. I think we have a minute for questions, and then I want you guys to get up and stretch and have a break before we start our afternoon panels. Anything pressing? Yeah. And there's little postcards around too with that, and we'll make an area on our website. We just did this. I haven't even looked at all the data yet. Any other thoughts? Big questions? Who feels positive about Nebraska? Yeah, I think it's really positive. Who feels really positive about 2067? I was like, what is that? What year is that? Okay, well, please take a break, get lots of food. We're not having lunch, but there's all sorts of kind of snacky stuff back there. So you are ready to hang out with us in a little bit. We'll be back at 10:45. 10:45 with Casey Baylitz. Thanks, y'all. Hi, thank you. Thanks for hanging out. My voice is gonna start to feel like nails on a chalkboard to y'all. We are so excited to be joined by Casey Baylitz. He's the current director of the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, appointed to the position by Governor Jim Pillen in July of 2023. Prior to DED, Casey served 4 years as Chief Operating Officer at Nebraska Community Foundation. That's where we met, working on a very cool project. Previously, he was the president of the Columbus Area Chamber of Commerce. So Casey has too many achievements to count. I'm not going to even try. I'm going to talk to this talking head. This is going to be fun. Hi, Casey. How are you? Can you introduce us to the idea of 6 regions, 1 Nebraska? Just in brief.
You bet. So over the last 4 or 5 years, a few of us have been having a conversation around how to promote to Nebraskans the idea that a regional approach to economic and community development is uniquely suited to this moment in history, just what the market demands. I would say at least one of the reasons for that is in an environment where it's really all driven by talent as opposed to recruiting jobs, that whole equation becomes much more complex because people are more complex than jobs. And so economic development organizations have had to worry about things that they've never considered before, like housing and childcare and amenities and quality of life and all those things that were just never an issue when we were just selling cheap land, cheap labor, cheap power. But with that equation changing, there is a need, we believe, for Nebraska communities, Nebraska economic development organizations to change the way they approach the work. And so it's really a mindset shift that we're after in the 6 Regions initiative. In order to do that, we're convening these groups to work on projects. That is really only a tool. What we know from, I think, past experiences that without something to catalyze around, the conversation just never happens. And so these projects that the group's undertaking are really that. It's an excuse. It's a catalyst to bring people together. The projects need to be successful because they're going to be the evidence or the success stories that we use to sell the concept of changing your mindset to one where if Nebraska City and Tecumseh work together, they actually both benefit more as opposed to one of them winning and one of them losing So the projects matter in terms of evidence that that's true, but really what we're after in 6 regions is the ability to change the way the Nebraska economic and community development organizations think about doing the work.
Thank you. So slightly contrary to what you just said, we made data a big part of those kickoff meetings. So just talk to me a little bit about why you even wanted data in the room, right? Like, why didn't they just get together and talk about what they saw in their communities? Why did you want that database?
Right. 2 answers to that one, maybe. Number one is really just my own personal experience with working to facilitate these sorts of community conversations over the past 5 or 10 years, and have really found that data is a compelling part of those discussions. It is, in my experience, one or two things in every one of those circumstances that it really gets people's attention. It starts conversation. It opens people's eyes. It's just a compelling way to start the discussion as opposed to what we all assume or think or guess. So that's one. It's really just from my own personal experience. Number 2, is that there is data here which has never been pulled together before. It's never been synthesized within a regional context. And so whether people have looked at data before or not, this was going to be brand new, and it was going to bring new context to those discussions.
Awesome. Any other examples of where throughout your career you've used data to advance economic development efforts? And that's kind of self-serving since we did one together.
Yeah, I'll give you 2, and so sure. Let's start with the Nebraska Youth Survey that we have done together over the last 5 or 6 years during my time at Nebraska Community Foundation. I think that research, that data, has been as compelling as anything that I have shared then or since, because I've certainly used it a lot in this role as well, to change people's, I would say, misperceptions about what our next generation of Nebraskans, what our next generation of workforce is looking for, because it is very different from their predecessors. And the data was very clear on how different it is and in what ways it is different. And that has really changed the conversation in a lot of places, and it's led to much better work. And the other story I would tell you that's a segue into it, where data has provided a community the opportunity to do better work, is an example that I have from Nebraska City, and this was a part of a facilitation that we did there, thinking about how their local affiliated fund of Nebraska Community Foundation could have impact in their community. And so we gave them a data point about their graduation rate, which is much lower than average in Nebraska City. And, anytime you find an outlier, that tends to be what gets people's attention, right? So in this case, that got their attention. And so they were having a good discussion about, okay, what should we do about a low graduation rate? How can we help? We need to get these kids to graduate. So maybe it's happening sooner. We should give scholarships to middle school students. That'll encourage them to college scholarships to middle school students. That'll encourage them to stay with it. And so I think the point of the story is that the data started them down the road, but then they took the next step and went out and got kind of personal one-on-one data from a conversation with the middle school principal, who told them in no uncertain terms, well, that won't work. Middle school students don't think 6 years out. They don't think 6 minutes out. And we all know that's true if we know middle school students. But the data point that he then gave them was, what do you suppose the graduation rate is from Nebraska City High School for students who are involved in at least 2 extracurriculars? It's 100%. Every one of their students who's involved in at least 2 extracurriculars graduates from high school. So he said, as opposed to scholarships, which will not move the needle and will cost you a lot of money, give these kids the resources they need to go out for a sport or be in the band or be in chorus or FBLA, whatever. Because if you get them in 2, 100% of them will graduate from Nebraska City High School. That is a compelling data point, which changed the way they were doing the work in ways that cost them less money and are far more impactful. And they would never have done that without having both pieces of data, both the data around the problem, but then the data around a potential solution. I think it's a great example of a place where data has truly made a difference in work that a community organization is doing.
Great point. Last question for you. So my experience, data isn't always widely accepted, right? People want to argue with it. I have a different story. I've seen it another way. Are you sure? So you're talking to a group of data nerds. We want to use data in this room. We want to share data with people like you to help make a difference. What makes you confident in some data, in a data presentation? What makes you think, oh, this is reliable, I can trust this? What helps you when you're looking at data?
Right. I think certainly the answer is going to be dependent upon who and the circumstance and all that. So I would put that qualifier on it up front. Clearly the source matters. Is it a source that I trust? Is it corroborated by other sources? All of those things that all of you know far better than I do in terms of what, would legitimately make data dependable. Your point about let's say the cognitive dissonance of data that doesn't align with what somebody wants to believe, that can be challenging. I think in that case, you have to sort of set it up in advance. And so, if you think about the times that I've introduced you in some of these 6 regions conversations, I always try to make the point that just because to say you're not going to agree with all of this data, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are things here that are challenging, and we should be willing to accept that as well. Because those are the realities. Data isn't good or bad. It's not a value judgment. It's just, here's the facts, right? And I know that has gotten more problematic in recent years because now we don't even agree on what's a fact anymore. So I understand the challenge of saying that. But I do think setting it up in the right way with the expectation that you may not agree with all of this, that doesn't mean it's not true, hopefully helps when you then share the data that isn't what someone either wants to hear, or, as you said, they have a different experience, they have a different story. So find, obviously, sources that are believable and legit, and then set up the conversation in the right way. I think that's as good as you can do, and maybe come with your own story that does support that data. If someone's got a different story, and they may, that's okay. We all understand, these are percentages. They aren't 100%. So if we've got stories that can illustrate the validity of that data, maybe that helps offset some of the concerns raised by someone that does have a different story that they've experienced.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the technical issues, but we appreciate you jumping on with us. So where are you right now?
East Campus. We're spending today with one of the 6 regions meetings. We're meeting with the Southeast team today, and they are putting that data to work today, working on, looks like they're going to settle maybe on infrastructure as their project.
Super interesting. Well, we thank you for what you're doing on this project and for the state, and jumping on with us to talk a little bit more about data. We appreciate it.
Yep, anytime. Have a great day, everybody.
We will let go of your talking head here in a moment. Morgan's going to introduce our next panel, building very much on the themes that Casey just set up for us. So,
yep, we'll give Josie a minute to take a break here. So panel, if you want to come up, that would be great. We have Alex Broderson, Assistant Director for Research and Evaluation with the Nebraska Statewide Workforce and Educational Reporting System, or NSERS, you may know it as. Katie Bass, Policy Research Manager with First 5 Nebraska. Lena Treslavina Stover, Executive Director for the Heartland Workers Center. And then John McCoy, Associate Economist in the Regional Affairs Department at the Omaha branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Thank you all.
Okay. So I pass each of the panels just to give a little introduction to themselves, their work. And then we are going to talk about this theme of data reliability, and like both as this statistical concept, but also as this, like, how do we get people to believe us when we're using data? Because it's really hard and they don't. So many examples of the issues with that. So I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Josie.
Somebody's.
There we go. Okay. So thank you, Josie. So I am here representing the Nebraska Statewide Workforce and Educational Reporting System, otherwise known as NSERS, like answers, but with a without the egg. And
Put the batteries in myself.
representing, NSERS, the Nebraska Statewide Workforce and Educational Reporting System. We are Nebraska's P20W statewide longitudinal data system. What that means, we effectively merge data from the public education entities in the state with workforce data, primarily for the purpose of providing decision-making support to,
It works.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah, primarily for the purpose of providing decision-making support to leaders, policymakers, and the general public of the state of Nebraska. We would not be in existence without data contributed by our partners. They're up here on the slide, very important to us. Those are signatories to our interlocal cooperation agreement that allow us to exist. Those signatories are the University of Nebraska system, the Nebraska State College system, individually, each of the 6 community colleges in the state, and the K-12 side of the data is represented by the Nebraska Department of Education. Should I bring it closer?
That's what we're hearing.
Perfect, thank you.
That's what we're not hearing.
We're also in affiliation with the Department of Labor that provides records that support the workforce side of our analytics. This is the type of, this is the scope of the work that NSERS attempts to accomplish. So anything along the education to workforce pathways continuum. We primarily focus on a set of key outcomes, usually represented by key intersections within this big diagram. So high school graduation, college going, persistence, and then workforce outcomes like are people getting jobs quickly after exiting their educational opportunities? Are they staying in Nebraska? Things like that. Now, when thinking about this concept of data reliability, I have broken it into a couple of key sections. The first side of that is receiving data. Now, NSERS does a couple of key things in this domain. First, we have a clearly defined data spec, and against that data spec, we impose some input validation on receiving that data. We receive data from a wide variety of types of organizations and levels of sophistication within the data systems across our partners, and so that's a really important step. Next, chain of custody is really important. We need our data contributors to understand that we don't change data that they provide to us. And so if they provide data and we find something that might be wrong or an error, they might be inclined to say, oh, well, just know that this is different. And we'll say, no, we need to maintain this chain of custody. Let's keep it consistent. Go ahead and resubmit that. And then finally, something I think that's pretty unique that we do is we have a certification process for the data as it comes into us. So we have a set of key metrics for every type of data element that we receive. And when we receive new data from our partners, we provide back to them a report that calculates, a couple of levels of statistics. Some of these are very simple, like, well, what was the graduation rate for all of these high schools? We might compare them to publicly available data, but ultimately we make our data contributors sign off on these elements, which is an intensive process, but it really maintains a high level of integrity of the data that's coming into the system. The next section are, things that happen when we are using the data. For us, it's important to have a cohort outcome model. So on the cohort side, it's defining a clear population that we're referencing. We have data that is primarily composed of administrative records. So we're using data for a purpose other than what it was defined, right? We have transactional data on the workforce side. We have, a variety of different data elements coming in from students leaving and entering the system. So it's important to group this logically in a way that we can narrow down on the populations or groups that we're focused on. And we found that that's been really helpful. just so that everyone knows specifically who are we talking about when we produce a report. The next thing is for the outcomes that we're producing, having a set of standard definitions that are really accessible for people. We found that in some cases, something as simple as a college going rate, so the percent of students who go to college, might have different definitions between public entities. And so it's important to us to, when there is a standard definition, adopt that. Otherwise, come up with our own and post it very publicly and clearly. The next key element, we have quite a large amount of data and constantly producing analytics on this set of data. It's become important to have what we call warehousing. So when we calculate derived fields for the data that are available within our system, that we store those and are able to reuse them. And that way, when we produce the same report multiple times, we don't have several different implementations of calculations going on that would result ultimately in inconsistent statistics that we're producing. Finally, I think this component that we work towards for data reliability might be our most important. Number one is consultation. And so that means at the beginning of fulfilling a data request or producing a report, that we make sure that we clearly identify what the needs of the person requesting this report are, and that what we can deliver ultimately matches those needs. Sometimes that's not the case, and so we ultimately decide not to go forward with producing that report because it's not going to answer their question to begin with. The second thing we do to ensure data reliability and the delivery of data products is implement a code review. It seems simple, but it might be tempting to have a single analyst put together the entire report from beginning to end. When that happens, we sometimes get blinders as analysts, and so it's helpful to have that external party or that second party come and review that. And then finally, the last thing we do is when we produce a report or fulfill a data request, such as like providing aggregate information via CSV, we attempt to give people the tools that they need to really understand the data. And most of the time that's providing them with things like a data dictionary and a description of how the elements were calculated. So at NSERS, that's primarily the type of work we're trying to do, producing public data analytical reports and fulfill data requests and evaluation services for the state. And those are the things that we do to ensure reliability in that aspect.
Several cool reports coming on answers right now.
Thank you. All right, I'm next. My name is Katie Bass, and I'm with First 5 Nebraska. And First 5 Nebraska is a public policy organization that is, not surprisingly, focused on the first 5 years of life. So to give you an idea of the work that we do, our focus is in having successful children, strong families, and prosperous communities. So when we're talking about successful children, we mean children who are born healthy to moms and families that are also healthy, and that are given the sorts of experiences they need early in life to develop to their full potential. Right. And a lot of our work then focuses on the child care space, right? And also maternal and infant health space. We have kind of two policy buckets that we work in. And then, of course, to have strong families, we need those families to be economically successful, right? And part of that is to have the sort of child care you need to have stability in your employment. Right. And the ability to live and work where you want to. And in order to live and work where you want to, we see childcare as an important part of that infrastructure. We also see delivery of health services as an important part of that infrastructure. And then those two things combined will lead us to prosperous communities here in Nebraska. This is one of the reasons why, as Casey mentioned earlier, childcare is an area of economic development that maybe has not historically been considered part of economic development, but we're learning more and more that if we want folks to stay in our communities, they need places where they are comfortable and feel that their children will be safe and cared for and given all of the things that they need while they can work and focus on work. So our vision then, or our work here, is to promote early childhood policies that will create those opportunities for growth. And we believe that those opportunities will benefit all of Nebraska. Most of our work is at the state level, but we also work a little bit in federal policy and then some local community building as well. So we do this through early childhood policy advisement. And then what I'm going to talk about today, my job is the policy research manager. So looking at policy research and data analysis, and then strategic engagement and advocacy. So let's talk about how data informs what we do at First Five Nebraska. When we think about early childhood policy, we want to make sure that we actually know what the needs are of different communities. And in order to do that, we need to be analyzing the data. We're not going to create a policy solely for the feels goods, right? We want to know that there's a problem and that problem needs to be solved. And so we're going to be looking at data to identify what those problems are in the first place. And then also, because we do work in public policy, our policymakers are going to say, if we do this, what's next? What's going to happen? So we're going to be looking at data that can demonstrate impact of different policies. And a big part of that, as you might imagine, is estimating costs of those policies and then turning around and estimating what is the return on investments of those costs. Right? So we're going to be doing a lot of work in that area. And part of the policy process for us is also measuring success, right? Sometimes the best envisioned policies can be implemented in ways that you didn't quite expect, right? And so how do we know that the policies that we're supporting and that we're working on are achieving what we want them to achieve, right? And so that's going to be the work that kind of falls in our policy research and data analysis bucket at First Five Nebraska. So I was asked today to talk just a little bit about data reliability. And I think, Josie, you may have stolen some of my thunder here on what I was going to talk about. A lot of our sources, that when we use census sources, we do focus on the ACS. And one of the most important things that we consider, or that I consider in my team, is our sample size, right? When we're measuring in Nebraska, we need to think about who that population is we're looking at. Now for us, I just told you our name is First Five Nebraska. So I'm looking at that under 6 population. So by the time I'm pulling American Community Survey data, and I want to look at, right up here, I put one of our most common maps, the number of children under 6 who are in households that are below 185% of the federal poverty level. Right. And we pick that number for important reasons. That's the free and reduced lunch line. It's also our current childcare subsidy eligibility line, right? But that's a lot of slicing and dicing of that American Community Survey data, which means we're always going to use the 5-year, right? We don't stray from the 5-year. And just like Josie mentioned, that means we don't use the 1 year in any other setting, even when we're talking about 1 year or statewide data, because we want it to be consistent. Because when you are working with folks and they say, why don't your numbers add up, right? That's a reliability issue. And so I need to be able to justify my numbers across the board. So I use 5-year consistently. The other thing we've really moved away from, in part because we are a policy organization, we typically don't do county level data because counties don't line up with our legislative districts, first of all, but also because now I have cut down, if I'm looking at Arthur County's number of children under 6 who are below 185% of the poverty level, the number is going to be 6 and the margin of error is going to be about 126, right? And that's not going to be very useful to us in the way we want it to be. Also, we have had counties who are working on community issues, right? And they say, you gave us a population number of 45 and we wanted to call and tell you that a baby was born. And we're like, okay, great. But like, that's no. And so we really moved away from using county level data because when you're using our legislative districts in Nebraska, you know, you're getting a sample size that is sufficient across the state, and it makes it comparable, right? Those numbers then in the legislative districts are comparable. There's also a second thing I want to highlight when I talk about why I prefer legislative districts over county, is that whenever I do county rankings, like you can find all sorts of national county rankings, Douglas County, Lancaster County typically show up in like the middle, upper middle, right? When you look at state rankings on prosperity, on anything, that masks so much. Because I just pulled Douglas County's legislative districts here, and you can see that in Douglas County, the counties with the most need are in the same vicinity as the counties with the least need, right? And so when you're doing only county level comparisons, you're really masking a lot of the diversity and a lot of the differential needs that we need to develop within our communities. And so this is why we tend to choose this particular level of analysis. Now, there's a lot more to data reliability, right? And we do a lot more than pulling ACS data. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different elements of our policy research. So I want to just kind of hit on a few things, because Josie had asked us, you know, it's not just data reliability in your numbers, but also that building trust. How do you make sure you have the right data and that folks trust you, right? And there are a couple of things that I have learned through my work at First 5 Nebraska. And one is that we do a lot of public records requests for data, for program data from, say, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Nebraska Department of Education. And one thing you need to do is know exactly what you're asking for, right? Because you can ask for data and get something very different than what you thought, right? And part of knowing what you're asking for is building relationships with the folks who are going to supply that data to you, right? So that they can have that conversation with you and help you organize those public records requests, help you understand the information that you're getting. So those relationships become key. The other is knowing how to data clean, especially when you're outside of census data. That is a big part of the work. You can't just take the numbers for what they are. You got to have those critical thinking skills of, this is an outlier. What does that mean? And then chase that down sometimes. Sometimes it's a lot of chasing down. But if you aren't doing that and you end up reporting numbers that aren't accurate, you're going to take a hit on your reliability as a source for data. Clear communication. What are we talking about? And what does that imply, right? The data sources aren't always what folks think they are. This has been a big thing since I started at First 5. I think in the public policy realm in particular, and within advocacy, people tend to cite each other without actually knowing where the data came from, right? Like, oh, this is a data source from First 5. No, it's not. It's a census data source that we analyzed. And you should know that, because that might be a 3-year-old statistic you're citing. It might be a 10-year-old statistic that somebody pulled. And so making sure that all of our documentation actually has those sources on it has become sort of my mission. They've decided that's what's going on my headstone, right? When I die, it's going to say, Katie Bass, cite your sources. And that's just what it is. I'm gonna hammer that home to everyone. And I'm not a source. I'm getting that from somewhere else. And you should know where that somewhere else is. And then, as I've kind of mentioned before, building relationships. And when I'm building relationships, I'm building them across the board, right? I'm building those relationships with policymakers so that they know that I know what I'm talking about, right? And part of that is also saying, I don't know when I don't know the answer, right? You got to be at the forefront of that. Building relationships with other folks who are in the data sphere. So they think, I'm going to call this person, right? I know I can call Josie. When she was showing the population estimates, I was like, oh, I was the dumb one who was like, Josie, you didn't actually send me to the table. And she's like, yes, I did. Scroll down, right? That was me like 3 weeks ago, because I forgot it was an Excel file, right? But we have those relationships with each other. So when I'm not the expert, I know who to reach out to, who is the expert. And then also building those relationships with our childcare community and our advocates on the ground so that they know, like, here's why I'm talking about this. And they can tell me, well, here's my experience, and I can look more into that and see, is that supported by the data? Is it a one-off? Let's talk through it, right? And so making sure that those relationships are across the board with the folks that I'm measuring, the folks I'm reporting to, and the folks that I'm getting data from or interacting with. All right, and I think that's my 10 minutes, so I will stop now.
Scroll down and scroll to the right.
Yes. All the time.
And I don't have a PowerPoint, so you only get to hear my voice. And I guess, look at the picture. Thank you. I would disagree. Lina Traslaviña Stover, Executive Director of the Harlem Worker Center, and I'm a sociologist, and I'm a qualitative researcher. And so I'm going to bring up perhaps a different perspective on all the numbers that we're hearing. And some of you already tuned out. Those stories. At the Harlem Worker Center, what we do is we advocate for immigrants and underrepresented communities, often hidden communities that are not represented or are not seen in the big data sets. So that's why the qualitative research or the qualitative information is so important to get to these populations. And I think it's important that we start, when we talk about reliability, we need to understand where people have resistance. And often people have resistance when their own experience does not match the story that we're telling them. And we always want to say, well, I am female, Latina, immigrant, and I'm not X, Y, or Z. So those data must be wrong, right? So I think it's important that when we tell the story of the data that we're presenting, that we explain how we got to those data. Cite your sources, I say it differently. How we got to those data, and also explaining, honestly, sometimes we have to explain the normal curve, right? A lot of these things, your experience, we have to allow people to say, your personal experience might not fit this story. And that is okay because of outliers, because we're not talking about outliers. We're talking about precisely what it's in within the normal curve. So in the same time, we also have to check for our own biases. We use terms all the time that we assume people understand. When we talk about foreign-born population, okay, we get it. But immediately in our heads, we're already making a translation of what foreign-born population means in terms of immigration. This is not true, but it could be all that foreign-born population, they could all be citizens. But in our head, we already made that, well, foreign-born population, not citizens. And these are silent assumptions that we even as researchers and data producers are making. So I think it's important that when we are sharing the story of what the numbers say, that we check on those assumptions, and it is very valid to say it out loud. What does this mean? It is important to also not only check the definitions, but state the definitions of the people that we're asking questions. So for example, the term refugee is perceived in Nebraska in a much more positive way. We want refugees in Nebraska. Refugee, if you look at the dictionary, is a person that is fleeing persecution. Refugee under immigration is a very different thing because it's an immigration status that you acquire when you were abroad. It's imperative that we clarify how we are using that term alone. Because is it under immigration status? Because that means that people from Mexico will never be refugees. A lot of people from South America will never be refugees because they simply don't have the choice, the chance by immigration to get that status. There could be a lot of asylum cases, which is also people fleeing for persecution, but they get that asylee status in the United States. But we use these terms, and now that it's an election year, I'm not sure if you knew, make sure you vote, create the plan to vote. There is a lot of narratives that are being spelled in the ads about all of these data that also are detrimental to our own data. Because it's the 1 second marketing figure that says immigrants are taking our jobs. And then Josie and all of us are going to say, no, we need immigrants to come and take jobs in Nebraska because we have a lot more jobs. So all of the jobs, yes, more people, please. But you see how the same sentence can be weaponized against a group of people. So it's imperative that we bring context to the statements that we make about the data, because within us researchers, we're very good at saying, well, this means that, and we assume that everyone understands that. But the reality is that there is a lot of bias behind it. I also think that the power of the qualitative story, it is not about necessarily finding the story that is going to match the information, but it's really about asking the question about what is going on. And I'll give you a real example. We have over 400 volunteers that are active volunteers in the Harlem Worker Center. We did a survey and about 125 of them responded to the survey. And I asked how many of them identified with the idea that they left their country in fear of persecution. And I was expecting a high number. I was expecting a lot of people to say, me. About 10% of people said so. That surprised me. And it didn't match my story, because I wanted to talk about, well, all these people are fleeing because of fear of persecution. But I need to be very honest also with the data that I get, even when it's 125 people, because the truth is that 125 people is representative of my community. So when someone then denies, well, it's only 125 people, what happens if we ask the 3 million people? Well, we could, but there is not 3 million immigrants in Nebraska. The other piece that I think is very important is to really have the chance to triangulate the data. So for me, it is to not only get the story of whoever I'm taking the story from, but then ask and give them a chance to say, is what I'm saying accurate? Is this really representative of what you wanted to do? And I'm going to use a term that I think that we all know, right? If we say that one of the values of Nebraska is that we want people to be respected for who they are. Respect. And immediately we're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Respect for who we are. I bet you if I do a quiz right now of define respect, I may find 80 different definitions. So I am really digging in sticking to definitions that you are using. Because yes, sometimes they're matching the general definitions that are out there, but more often than not, when we are talking, especially in the nonprofit sector, we are borrowing terms and words from other places without care on the definitions. We just jump in and assume that we know the definitions. So I think it's imperative to check definitions, check for biases, and once again, consider why people are resistant. And again, give permission for people to be the outlier, because that's often what people think of when there's resistance on the plate. It's often because there is an outlier and they identify as the outlier.
Perspective. Thank you. Take us home.
All right. Good morning, everybody. For a couple more minutes anyway. My name is John McCoy. I'm an associate economist at the Omaha branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, just right downtown here. So what I thought I'd do is just spend a couple minutes kind of explaining why the central bank has offices in Omaha, kind of what we do, on a regional basis, it's not necessarily immediately apparent to the interest rate people why we might have a research function here in Nebraska. So just to kind of level set, and apologize if most of you know this already, but certainly some might not. So the central bank, the Federal Reserve, is the central bank of the United States and is really intentionally kind of designed to incorporate regional perspectives in the course of setting monetary policy, setting interest rate policy, and regulations that ultimately impact the banking community kind of across the country. So our branch here in Omaha, our head office is in Kansas City, but we're really the state's connection to the central bank of the United States. It's a unique structure among central banks kind of across the world. So it's a public-private partnership. So about half of the policymakers are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And about half of the policymakers, including our bank president down in Kansas City, is privately appointed. So I'm a private employee, which is often also not understood. So public kind of policymakers, people that you might be immediately familiar with, Jay Powell's the chair of the FOMC. So often kind of in the financial news when interest rate policies are decided, that sort of thing. In contrast, 12 different Reserve Bank presidents kind of comprise that private sector side of the policymaking side of the equation. That's really quick, just to kind of level set, and I'll get into kind of what we ultimately do. The local connection is really closely intertwined with the community. So we have a board of directors, staff, obviously here in Omaha. The board of directors represents all parts of our state, with the intention of incorporating different perspectives into the policymaking process. So ultimately, what we're seeking to accomplish is this first part of our mission is maintaining stable prices, full employment, and relatively moderate interest rates over the long term. So how that gets operationalized on the local level is our team in Omaha. We have teams in Denver and Oklahoma City, ultimately trying to answer the question is, how is the region's economy performing? So when we're talking about data reliability, we're ultimately trying to incorporate and balance a lot of different sources to be able to answer that one question about how our region is performing economically, with the intention that the other 12 reserve banks kind of around the country are answering the same question for their respective regions, with the goal of rolling that up into a national interest rate type policy. So while we can't set, regionally specific interest rates, unfortunately, it's just kind of the nature of the policy question that we have in front of us. We are incorporating various perspectives across different sets of data, which I'll talk about here in just a minute, from across the country. So to kind of dive into that operationalization question a little bit more fully, like I mentioned, my team is specifically focused on that regional policy question. We also have teams kind of focused on different aspects of the economy. So we'll have a national kind of macroeconomic forecasting group. We have different sectors kind of focused on community development space, different teams focused on banking and finance, et cetera, all with the goal of informing our policymaker, again, our bank president, on the best, on what he should be thinking about when he goes to that meeting in Washington every 6 weeks. So our policy window's a little bit more quick in terms of turnover than a lot of people that might have heard about from today. So when we're talking about kind of the data that goes into this fundamental question of how is our region's economy doing, how is our state's economy doing, we're really kind of collecting it from three different kind of broad avenues. So the first one would be public data. So I think a misconception about the Federal Reserve is often that we're kind of a unique data generator. In reality, we're relying on a lot of the same government kind of funded and created data sets that a lot of you are. So the ACS, the current population survey, various things like that, kind of on that quantitative basis. We do run some of our own unique surveys, which are surveys of the business community in a couple different industries kind of across our region. And we, again, use a lot of that government provided data set to kind of baseline and maintain a representative sample for the various kind of industry sectors that we're interested in surveying. So that's kind of really the only unique data that we generate. The third data set is actually from the qualitative side of the picture, and it's a good way for us to kind of reinforce that reliability. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about the statistical reliability of things, but relying on one-on-one conversations with members of the business or nonprofit community, with roundtable conversations, even at events like this, and kind of hearing what questions are on people's mind, kind of helps us either check our story and say, okay, yes, kind of what we've seen in the data lines up with what other people who are looking at data are seeing, or if we're hearing something different, or we're hearing about businesses or organizations making a decision that's going a different way, that causes us to go back and look at the data and say, okay, did we miss something here? Or is this an inflection point that maybe the data is not capturing yet? That sort of thing. So we'll see if this yep. Okay. So kind of the last kind of portion that I'll kind of talk about, and then we'll turn back to questions, is this balancing act that we have to do because we're on that quicker policy rate, that policy cycle. So our policy committee meets about every 6 weeks. So we're trying to kind of continuously balance a reliable data set with a timely data set. So what's going on at the moment, what's happened over the last 6 weeks, with how reliable is that data? Can we actually be making good policy recommendations from that data set? So I'll give a couple of examples kind of that tease that kind of tension that we might see from those trade-offs. So the current population survey, Josie mentioned that earlier, that's kind of where we live and breathe. That's a monthly survey, comes out within 10 days of the previous month. 60,000 households are surveyed across the country. So it's very timely. It has a lot of good demographic data, lots of good kind of timely economic questions, but it's a sample size of 60,000 kind of across the country. So when you're starting to break that down into regions, and then so about 1,500 people in Nebraska, for example, and then further, into different demographic groups that you might be interested in, different labor force statuses, that sort of thing, it gets to be in that statistical reliability a little bit more questionable. So having to look at, longer time horizons, kind of looking at moving averages, that sorts of thing to kind of reliably use that data set. We will then kind of use that in conjunction with some longer term kind of baselining type data sets. So we mentioned the quarterly census of employment and wages earlier as well. That's a good semi-timely data set. It's only about a 6-month lag, but we'll benchmark a lot of our kind of understanding about the structure of the regional economy from that. So it covers about 95% of U.S. employment. It's kind of based on administrative records with very, very detailed both county level and industry level data. So that's a good way for us to kind of measure in a relatively timely manner kind of how the structure of the regional economy is evolving. When it comes down to the kind of the fundamental baseline of what does our region look like, again, we're very prominent ACS users as well. So that even a lot of those questions that come from the ACS that might not move dramatically over time, that's kind of where we formed that basis. So what does our region or what does our state look like demographically? What ought we see in some of these timely, if we check the number of women participating in the labor force from the current population survey, that should be in line with what we see from the ACS. So if we see 1 month spike way up, that's probably an outlier month that needs to be kind of dealt with in that sort of way. So really, when we kind of come down to it, and I'll wrap up and we'll turn to questions. Certainly looking for data reliability in the service of kind of answering that core policy question of how is our regional economy performing for the sake of kind of informing monetary policy. So that requires using data of different sources, both publicly available, privately generated, and qualitative in nature, but then also kind of relying on data sets that take different samples, different time horizons, and different kind of depth and availability of data on the lag. So
let's give it up for this panel. I did not give them that much direction, but they definitely read my mind and brought it today. So thank you all. Yeah, I'll open it up. Do you all have any questions or clarifying questions? I have a couple prepared. You've all brought up some really interesting points I'm happy to talk about, but yeah, grab over here. I got to stop saying yeah. It's yes, ma'am. So I have, is that on? Okay,
I work for the Nebraska Arts Council, and we have two very small data sets that my office wants me to do research on. And it's art therapists where there's only 33 licensed in Nebraska, and then looking at art creative districts, which are very, very small. Geographic areas. What advice do you guys have for helping with data validity there when I'm dealing with such a small sample?
So I am pro putting together data sets, right? We use a lot of available data sets, but I am pro people collecting data. You are data, you have data. Everybody goes searching for data. You have data. So I am very focused on helping people to use data. Maybe Alex and Katie, as like compilers of other people's data, have some good thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
Sure. Can I ask a follow-up question? Did you say art therapists? Is that what it was?
Yes, art therapists.
Yeah. So, and these are licensed?
Yeah, there we go. That one's working. They're licensed nationally, but not in Nebraska. We just passed art therapy licensing this year, so nobody has gone through that process statewide yet.
Yeah. Well, just an offhand comment. One thing that I'll say is you have a list of all of them, right? That's census level data. So things that are true about those 33, are true about the entire population. Now, where you have to be careful is with the interpretation of any inferences you make on the back end, because what's true for those first 33 are not going to be true for the next 33 necessarily. And that's just the one comment, but that's where you have to be careful with that.
Thank you.
Yep, I would agree. I mean, you do have that whole population, and you probably also then have access to speak to them if there's more follow-up that you need to do, as opposed to oftentimes when we're working with larger data sets, there isn't that direct follow-up with everyone who is being asked questions. The other thing I would look for too is if you have corroborating data sets that may help you. And I don't know about specific questions that you're trying to answer, but being able to say, this person is within a region that has this many folks, and there are other data sources that you could kind of work in conjunction with to build up the information that you have.
Great, thank you.
And it is totally okay to think about it as a case study. So just, there is no need to say, I'm going to find all the answers and generalize this for the entire art therapist community in the world. No, you are just talking about this case study of these 33 people, and whatever you find true, it will be true for those 33 people. And that should give you some sense of it's okay.
Thank you.
Other questions from the group? One over there. Oh, Jungman's got to run.
For answers, I think, can you hear me now? Okay. I think there's a lot of questions about where is the data, who can request it, is there a general website or something where the data can be drawn, or do you have to do it as a request, and who are your usual customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first I'll say we're very new. As a body, we've been around for 4 years. We only had more than one employee as of 3 years ago, and we only had data as about of a year and a half ago. And so we're rapidly building and scaling to meet the needs of the state with that. We do have a website. There's a place where anyone from the public could go and make a data request against the system. We never give out any individual level records or anything of that sort, but we do allow for aggregate data requests that meet the needs and purposes of the NSERS data system. And one thing I'll say is that we're building a public-facing site. We're building out our public-facing site to house our public research products, as well as dashboards that people might find interesting.
My question is for Alex as well. It sounds like your organization is kind of a consumer of administrative data from a lot of different entities, like UNO, for example. I imagine you're consuming like row level data, so like representing a single person. I'm curious if you ran into any roadblocks or potential hesitations from like this partnership in terms of you as a consumer of potentially personally identifying information, and how you sort of like solved that or got by it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. These data have been put together for some very, very specific purposes, right? And that's to evaluate public education and workforce development programs within the state of Nebraska. And so I will say that the data sets that we receive individual level information, but the data sets that my team and I work on have actually been stripped of all potential identifiers. We're very, very careful about that. We have a 100+ page data management policies and procedures document that ensure the highest level of security, and we intentionally meet the highest level of security standards that we can. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, follow up, I guess, if there's any consideration with, I mean, acknowledging that you strip probably like names and say birthdays and things, but like certain combinations of demographic information potentially. I'm wondering if like that came into the discussion. So like if you're getting fed a row level of a person and it represents, their race, their age, and their county, like for some really rural areas, like figuring out who that is. This is a problem I've run into and worked before that you want to be able to solve. And so I'm curious if that's come up.
We consider, right, heavily this concept of the privacy utility trade-off, right? So every aggregation of data that you release leaks just a tiny bit of information about the underlying data set that was used to create it. And there are a lot of ways to combat that. I think the term differential privacy from the US Census was something that was discussed or brought up in this section. That's incredibly complex, it's an incredibly complex framework for handling that privacy utility trade-off. But on top of that, there are just some sensible policies that you can have, right? Obviously never providing aggregate information that has a cell count that is too small. That's one sensible policy that you can have. And frankly, we're working on improving and developing those policies. Another option, right, that you can have is only producing things based off of synthetically generated data sets. So that's you take the underlying data set, generate representative samples from that are completely synthetic, that fit the underlying properties of the data, and then calculate statistics based on that. That's something that the census has done. For example, their PSEO, post-secondary employment outcomes work is based, I believe, at least partially on synthetic data. And so that's just one of dozens of things. This is a very active area of research, nationally, and we're trying to respect and learn everything we can about how to employ those and adopt those policies.
Thanks.
Personal opinion, I think Nebraskans are too tight on that security, privacy, utility trade-off. We won't report some things. I'm like, we could report that. It's fine, but I'm pro data, right? In all its forms. I don't care. I want to see it out there. Other questions from the group or online, Clay? Oh, we got lots of them. Okay, no problem.
Our director from the research team here looked at all that census data and said, the economy in Nebraska is doing well. The banking representative here says his job is to describe how the economy is performing in Nebraska. So what do you say to her conclusion?
I say she pretty much nailed it, so like anything,
paid to say that.
depends on what level of aggregation you start to look at. At its highest level, the state seems to be doing pretty well. There's certainly pockets of geographies or groups within the state that are not doing as well, but kind of on balance, we seem to be in a pretty good position kind of coming out of this inflationary bout. Okay, so.
Can you identify a couple of those pockets?
Sure. So we're working on some research right now that shows the number of people holding multiple jobs has increased. So even as employment is increasing, the number of job openings is going down, but we're seeing the number of people taking 2 jobs or more increasing, which could be a sign of, households perhaps not in as financially stable a position as we originally thought. So that's certainly something that's front of mind right now, but we're always kind of looking at sub pockets within the state as well that might not have the same labor outcomes or income outcomes as well. So.
And Katie, you made a good point too about the geography, right? It could look great at that state level, which is what I'm reporting at that 1 year, and still not feel that way to lots of people within an area, for sure. I think the next one was up here.
Yeah, thanks. You always have time between you raise your hand and get the microphone to think, is this a good question? So this is really qualitative, so not probably the best question for a data conference, but you talked about Nebraskans, being tight on data and not wanting to disclose. Do you see any trends kind of in like generational cohorts of like I'm on a certain end of the millennial cohort, and I don't really care. If I want to answer the question, you can do whatever you want with it, right? If you have it, go for it. Do you see that kind of becoming more relaxed with the data as people, or disclosure as the generations kind of move down that spectrum, or is it kind of tight across?
Interesting. It could be generational, right? I'm all about the utility of data, right? So I think it's less generational and more just like an occupational hazard, right? Like I think data has so much promise to answer really important questions, and the more fine-grained I can be, the more I can answer those questions and provide really usable statistics. I just saw Matt Hastings present some NSWERS data, right? And if we gave the scholarship to 30 and up ACTs versus I think it's now 32 and up ACTs, this is how many more students we can include, right? Like I want that level of detail. We can change policy and make things happen. So I'm just like more on that. I go more on that utility spectrum. But I think there's probably political reasons why some people are a little bit more worried about security. I do think in small geographies, it is more identifiable. So I do think Nebraskans have to be on guard. I was just having a conversation over here about, totally identifiable data. And right, I don't want that. I actually don't want people to even know. I would know where to find it. I cannot access Census Bureau. I can access individual records, but they are de-identified in such a way that I couldn't even place them geographically, right? When I go to that level of detail. I don't want people to even know I could access that data set because I don't know why we need to answer some of those questions, right? It actually really goes back to this research methods conversation, right? We have to have a good question. There has to be a reason to answer it. We need to triangulate data. I think that came up really well through Lena's talk. Just the data isn't enough, even if it has a lot of utility. We have to have context to that data. We have to be able to say, that's not everybody. There's some other story there too. Other thoughts on that?
I want to self-correct and say that thinking about that, I definitely had a straight white man. There's a reason why I don't care.
There you go.
No one's put together a list of straight white men,
Yeah, fair. I probably fall on that too. Like, what's the point? It's fine. Yeah.
My opinion is shaped by my data is pretty powerful.
Well, thank you for checking your own bias. I appreciate it.
Well done.
I just want to say something not necessarily related, but in some ways, what erodes trust. When I heard Casey, for example, talk about that easy solution of getting middle school students to engage in 2 extracurricular activities, that sounds fantastic, right? I want to go and do it. Sounds easy. But then when I think about the immigrant population, in the immigrant population, extracurricular activities are literally extra. School is school. So we have to go through the process of engaging with the immigrant communities on why extracurricular activities actually do matter, the extra expenses, who's going to cover those expenses, the transportation to get to that, because if you are in a shift kind of job, who's going to pick up and deliver those kids to those activities? So what seems like a simple solution that most of us that have the cultural understanding of what it is to be a cheerleader or playing the football team, that makes sense. But when we bring it to other populations, then that's when we see flaws in the process. And it's very easy to then say, well, immigrants don't care about education, for example, when the reality is that there is a lot more from the data to the solution to actually the implementation of that solution.
This is going to be our last question. I think we could talk forever. I want to, but go ahead.
Hi, my name is Catherine Brown. Thank you to all the panelists. So question came up for me as y'all were talking, consent. How or if does that play into the work you do around reliability and trust building around data?
For me, of course, since we do rely a lot on interviews and case studies, very open about consent and thinking very clearly, of course, on the possible ramifications of the people responding the questions I'm asking. And we stripped all identifiable data very early on to make sure that it's part of the training as a researcher, but I'm saying it out loud because that ought to happen for everyone involved. So strict with the discipline and ethics of doing research.
Yeah, oftentimes I'm dealing with census data or public administration data. And when you're dealing with dollars and accountability, the sort of consent rules are a little bit different. But similar to Lena, I almost always use a mixed methods approach on large studies that we're conducting. And I actually use an iterative consent process. So there's an explanation of what we're doing right from the beginning to even put your name in for consideration. Then when we're interviewing you, we're having another conversation about what this data will be used for, who the intended audience is, what we will do to maintain confidentiality, and what our process is. Then after the interviews, I always send a summary saying, this is what I heard from you. Is this what you meant to say? And then what I'll do, like recently we did a large project that involved parents, providers, and community members. Then I would send them another, before this study is finished, here is the summary of everything I heard from parents if you were in the parent group. I want you to have that to know that your experience may have been very different from other people's, so that you, before this is published, you see how your conversation fit in. And at the same time, I'm asking at every single iteration to verify quotes, ask me to change or reduce something, and at any point you can withdraw from the process. So consent for me on qualitative work is iterative and it's continuous until that final product is developed.
And I think that this is different than journalism, and I think that we need to bring it as of why we're doing all of these things. And as a nonprofit, sometimes we use these stories that are going to show our impact. It is imperative that the person gives the consent, that they know that this is going to be published, where it's going to be published, and how it's going to be published, with pictures or without pictures. Because at that point, it's not a research, it's not part of the research, it's more marketing. I see it in the journalistic way.
Wonderful. Thank you to the panel so much.
Just a few announcements before we conclude today. First of all, please, I want to shout out our staff. So, Tara Rowell, our public communications and creative coordinator. Dina Lund was out in our lobby today. Our community service specialist, Clay Stevens, our research software engineer in the back, has been on Zoom all day. So they worked behind the scenes. Tara, in particular, did all of the graphics, the emails that you received, everything. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. We really appreciate all you do for us and our exceptional branding. Okay, couple of final reminders. So you see the QR code on the screen. This will take you to the presentations, all of the materials, the recording. You'll receive an email about that, notifying you when it's available about a week from today. Please scan the QR code and take the evaluation. We really appreciate your feedback so that we can improve for next year. Let us know what topics you're interested in, and we can continue with the professional development. We have the room until 1, so if you want to network or grab food or anything like that, please be sure to do so. And I hit all my points. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your continued partnership. And on behalf of the team, have a great day. We'll see you in December. It'll be virtual for part 2 when we'll do those more recent census release. That's Thursday, December 19th. So mark your calendars. Thank you. Have a great day.